Have you ever sensed an unaccountable chill around someone, like an unseen, disquieting undercurrent, moving beneath the polish of their smile? Have you ever felt that quiet inner no around someone who otherwise seemed perfectly pleasant? Comment 1 if you've trusted that instinct and stepped back. Comment 2 if you ignored it and later wished you hadn't. Over decades of clinical practice, Carl Jung observed a troubling pattern, a silent cue signaling a risk more serious than overt physical danger. Our conscious mind often overlooks this sign, though our most primitive instincts register it. It rarely shows up as hostile speech or blatant toxicity. Its subtlety is exactly what makes it so perilous. If you feel these psychology sharings are helpful and relatable, you're welcome to become a channel member and stay with us on a deeper journey. As a member, you'll get early and extended access to more in-depth practical content that you can apply in everyday life. Ancient traditions cautioned against such individuals, and Jung gave scientific language to what earlier cultures intuited. Most unsettling, this signal can appear in those who seem entirely normal, even charming, and when you notice it, the prudent response is immediate withdrawal. Among Jung's findings about relationships, shadow projection may be the most hazardous mechanism of all. Picture this in conversation: someone abruptly assigns you motives, thoughts, or flaws you have never shown. They are not engaging with you, but with a caricature they have constructed. If this feels familiar, you are witnessing Jungian shadow projection in a stark, undiluted form. The shadow comprises what we disown in ourselves, traits we deem unacceptable and push into the unconscious. Yet these parts do not vanish. They persist outside awareness, gathering force in the recesses of the psyche. When a person habitually casts their shadow onto others, they display Jung's most ominous signal, an utter incapacity to acknowledge their disowned qualities. Unable to perceive these traits in themselves, they see them only in others. So from their viewpoint, you truly embody what they most reject. Long before Jung's academic framing, spiritual traditions recognized this process. Buddhism speaks of a darkened mirror that casts one's own stains as if they were external. Christianity offers the image of the beam in one's own eye, while noticing the speck in another's. Alarmingly, the projector is fully persuaded by their view. They are not deliberately deceiving. They genuinely perceive in you what they cannot accept in themselves. This distortion produces a powerful certainty that can be highly convincing to bystanders, enabling them to recruit others to their portrayal of you. Contemporary neuroscience supports Jung's claim that the brain filters reality to reinforce prior beliefs. But under intense shadow projection, this filtering can swell into a wholesale warping of reality. Researcher Robert Johnson likened the effect to dawning lenses that alter the appearance of the entire world. How can you recognize heavy shadow projection? A key sign is a gap between their claims about you and your own inner experience. They ascribe motives you never held or emotions you never felt. And most troubling, they assert these judgments with unwavering certainty, untouched by any counter-evidence. What is actually unfolding in that moment? You are encountering the outward display of an inward conflict. The person is battling aspects of themselves they refuse to accept, and you have unintentionally become the terrain on which that struggle plays out. The old saying tells us the road to hell is lined with good intentions. Jung would extend this, noting that, and driven by those who consider themselves unquestionably good ego. Inflation represents an extraordinary danger precisely because it disguises itself as virtue. When you observe someone completely convinced of their moral superiority, their spiritual infallibility, or of possessing an absolute truth, you are witnessing what Jung called psychic inflation, perhaps the most alarming sign of all. Unlike ordinary arrogance, which is easy to spot, Jungian inflation is deeper and more perilous. It arises when the ego fuses with archetypal material, most often the figure of the Savior, the enlightened one, or the bearer of truth. The individual ceases to see themselves as a finite human and instead identifies as a direct emissary of the divine or the absolute. Centuries ago, the German mystic Meister Eckhart cautioned against this snare, calling it the most subtle pitfall on the spiritual path. Zen teachings refer to Zen sickness and Sufi lineages to the veil of light deemed more hazardous than the veil of darkness, because it hides in what seems holy and is thus harder to detect. A telltale marker is the absence of self-doubt regarding their motives. Whereas the great sages have shown humility before life's mysteries, those in the grip of psychic inflation display unshakable certainty. They do not consider that they might be mistaken, since they believe they voice not personal views, but universal truth. Especially dangerous is the potent charisma this state can produce. Jung noted that leaders steeped in psychic inflation draw fervent followers largely due to the aura of total conviction they project. That certainty soothes our profound longing for safety and clear answers amid a world rife with ambiguity. The Chilean psychologist Claudio Naranjo, versed in spiritual traditions, observed that the spiritual ego is the most refined and elusive. A common ego announces, "I am important." An inflated spiritual ego declares, "I am a channel of the supreme good." This nuance clarifies why many are captivated by potentially harmful figures who nonetheless appear spiritually exalted. How can you spot psychic inflation? Watch how they handle dissent. A person inflated by archetypal identification treats critique not as valuable input, but as an insult to the cosmic order they believe they embody. They read opposition not as normal disagreement, but as defiance of the good, the truth, or the divine they presume to represent. How do you handle people who treat disagreement like a moral offense? Comment 1. If you set firm boundaries right away. Comment 2. If you try to win them over with more evidence first. Jung cautioned that this condition imperils others, and above all, the sufferer. The small ego's identification with transpersonal forces strains the psyche to a breaking point that eventually seeks compensation. The larger the inflation, the more severe the crash. When the disowned material breaks through, few things are more unnerving than a person who always presents exactly what you expect to see. Jung noted a troubling pattern, a level of social adaptation so flawless it erases rough edges, contradictions, and genuine spontaneity. This immaculate mask, Jung's persona, borrowed from Greek theater, serves as a warning our instincts register long before our conscious mind can name it. Complete fusion with the persona is profoundly dangerous, signaling a split between outward image and inner life. Such a person has traded authenticity for social approval, building a facade so intricate that even they have lost touch with what lies behind it. As the poet Fernando Pessoa noted, the peril is not the mask itself, but forgetting that it is a mask. Eastern contemplative paths have long described this dynamic. Zen speaks of the original face before birth, the core authenticity beyond social roles. Taoist masters warn that over-polishing the surface can erode the substance beneath. Jung recast these age-old insights in the vocabulary of modern psychology. A red flag appears as a peculiar artificiality in your interactions. Though their conduct is flawless, they always have the right words, gestures, and expressions. The encounter lacks the unpredictability and roughness that mark real human presence. As Jungian analyst James Hollis observed, hyper-polished social adaptation frequently signals a corresponding void within. Contemporary neuroscience highlights a related effect. Mirror neurons help us sense subtle mismatches among others' words, faces, and bodily cues. When a person's mask diverges sharply from their inner state, these systems trigger a cautionary signal we register as vague unease or distrust. The deeper risk is what such dissociation conceals. When all psychic energy is poured into preserving a perfect exterior, the disowned parts do not vanish. They gather in the unconscious as what Jung termed the shadow. The more rigid the persona, the more turbulent and potentially destructive the shadow's eventual eruption. Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's close collaborator, noted that people with seamless social personas often undergo shadow eruptions, bursts of pent-up energy that explode unpredictably and may be harmful. This helps explain why seemingly exemplary individuals can commit unexpectedly destructive deeds. In Jung's view, full identification with the persona is a betrayal of the self, abandoning true individuality. For an artifice, and like any deep betrayal, it exacts a psychological price over time. Imagine speaking with someone when all at once a subtle, yet profound shift occurs. The body is the same, but their gaze energy and presence alter, as if something ancient and transpersonal were moving through them. Many traditional cultures have called this kind of experience possession. Jung framed it as archetypal possession, arguably the most disquieting sign we can perceive in another person. For Jung, archetypes are primal templates within the collective psyche, organizing forces in human experience that hold both light and dark potentials. When an archetype overtakes someone's awareness, individuality recedes, and they become a conduit for transpersonal energies that surpass what the person can integrate. Many shamanic lineages grasped this dynamic well. Anthropologist Milta Eliade described how shamans distinguished disciplined, intentional channeling from perilous possession states, in which personal identity is fully submerged. In Christian mysticism, discernment of spirits is the crucial capacity to tell life-giving influences from those that can harm. A key red flag is the loss of ordinary psychological flexibility when a person fuses rigidly with one archetypal script. Whether it is the unquestionable savior, the tireless warrior, the perennial victim, or the faultless judge, matters less than the total identification itself. Telltale signs can include an uncanny gleam in the eye's speech that feels monolithic, and the sense that the person is not fully present in a normal way. As Jungian analyst Robert Moore noted, you are engaging not a whole personality, but an archetypal fragment that has seized the controls of awareness. Modern neuropsychology has observed altered states in which regions tied to personal identity are dampened, while networks related to transpersonal experience become highly active. Helpful within structured ritual settings, such states can be hazardous when they erupt spontaneously without a safe container. Especially concerning is the intense certainty and purpose that accompany archetypal possession. The ambiguities of everyday awareness give way to absolute conviction, a magnetism that can strongly sway other people. Jung noted that political and religious figures in archetypally possessed states often ignite mass movements propelled by their aura of more than human certainty. Have you ever been swept up by a leader's total certainty or felt wary of it from the start? Comment 1. If conviction drew you in before you had doubts. Comment 2. if that very certainty made you step back. The core risk is that archetypes as primordial patterns hold stark polarities. The savior figure, for instance, can express both redeeming compassion and destructive fanaticism. Once someone fully identifies with an archetype, its darkest potentials tend to surface, often without the person recognizing the inner contradiction. Jung recorded many instances in which archetypally possessed individuals behaved in ways that blatantly violated their stated values, later recalling events only partially, or explaining them away with drastic rationalizations. Archetypal possession entails a temporary collapse of self-reflection, the very capacity that marks our humanity. Another deeply troubling phenomenon recognizable as a tragedy in motion is what Jung termed the compulsion to repeat an unconscious pattern, in which a person obsessively recreates the same painful scenarios as though trapped in an unseen maze. When we clearly notice this sign in someone, it warns of exceptional risk. We may be drawn into a psychological drama that is not ours. The most alarming feature of repetition compulsion is its automatic, unconscious nature. People do not willfully choose to relive destructive patterns. They are driven by deep psychic forces operating beyond awareness. As psychoanalyst Christopher Bullis put it, these are unthought knowns, formative events so early or traumatic that they were never consciously processed, yet they shape everything that follows. Spiritual paths have acknowledged this for ages. Originally, Buddhist karma referred not to cosmic reward and punishment, but to conditioning patterns that drive us to reproduce similar situations repeatedly. Psychologically, the Judeo-Christian notion of original sin can be read as inherited unconscious patterns we continue without choosing. A clear indicator is someone repeatedly landing in similar painful scenarios with different people, all following a strikingly familiar script. More unsettling, they appear genuinely shocked, each time as if fate targeted them, rather than their unconscious shaping the recurrence. Contemporary neuroscience offers a biological underpinning early experiences. Particularly, trauma lay down neural pathways that become the brain's paths of least resistance. Over time, the brain forms expectations that unconsciously seek confirmation of existing world models, even when those models cause suffering. Perhaps most dangerous, those caught in repetition compulsions unwittingly enlist others to act in their unresolved inner drama. As psychoanalyst Donald Calchit observed, unprocessed trauma insists on being staged. We can end up cast in a narrative that started long before we arrived. Jung noted a striking pattern: the less conscious the repetition compulsion, the more it appears as synchronicities, meaningful coincidences in outer life. Unconsciously, the individual sets up circumstances that mirror unresolved inner dynamics, yet perceives them as thrust upon them by a harsh or unfair fate. Clinically, Jungian therapists flag this sign when a person recounts recurring tales of betrayal, abandonment, misunderstanding, or victimhood that follow an eerily similar script. As Marie-Louise von France put it, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Most troubling, repetition compulsion exerts a near magnetic pull. Those ensnared in it unwittingly broadcast cues that draw in people suited to restage the original trauma. Jung termed this negative synchronicity, the unconscious's remarkable capacity to arrange meetings that keep its unfinished patterns alive. If these signals mark the gravest dangers in Jung's view, there is also a path beyond them: conscious shadow integration. This practice is the key distinction between psychologically hazardous individuals and those committed to the work of wholeness. Intriguingly, integration is as recognizable as its lack. When we see it in someone, we encounter the very opposite of psychological threat. Shadow work is not moral spotlessness or the erasure of flaws. Rather, it involves a humble, deliberate acknowledgement of our own capacity for the same errors and darkness we see in others. As Jung said, "I would rather be whole than good." This often misread line highlights the gap between genuine integrity and a perfection mask that conceals perilous inner splits. For millennia, contemplative paths have described this transformation in varied idioms. Tibetan Buddhism teaches turning poison into medicine, working skillfully with even our most difficult effects. Western alchemy, which captivated Jung, symbolizes it as converting lead, the rejected, into gold-integrated awareness. Clear markers of genuine integration include a distinctive blend of candor about one's own shadow and compassion for others' shadows. Such a person can acknowledge problematic impulses without undue shame or self-excusing, treating them as human realities that demand ongoing attention. Contemporary neuroscience reports measurable correlates of integration. Researchers like Daniel Siegel describe how linking previously dissociated experiences forges new neural connections across regions, especially between subcortical emotional centers and prefrontal systems involved in self-reflection. The paradox of this work is its power. By consciously acknowledging our most troublesome aspects, we greatly reduce the risk of enacting them unconsciously. As Jungian analyst Robert Johnson noted, what we deny does not disappear. It simply emerges in forms over which we have less control. Conscious integration converts potentially destructive energy into usable creative force. Those truly engaged in this inner labor show a distinctive trait: they perceive nuance rather than strict binaries. They resist hard splits between good and bad, acknowledging shared human complexity. As Jungian psychologist James Hollis notes, psychological maturity starts when we let go of the fantasy of our pure innocence. Across history, authentic spiritual figures have modeled integration. The Dalai Lama candidly acknowledges moments of anger. Teresa of Avila admitted stretches of spiritual aridity. The Sufi poet Rumi wrote of his inner contradictions. Such radical honesty stands in sharp contrast to the polished perfectionism of those split off from their shadows. A reliable sign of ongoing integration is the pairing of real humility, not faux modesty, with true authority, not authoritarianism. Integrated people need not advertise their goodness or wisdom. They have outgrown the craving for a spotless self-image. When humility and true authority finally meet in one psyche, you're standing at the threshold of what Jung called individuation, the lifelong work of becoming a single homogeneous being, not by sanding off your complexities, but by entering a conscious covenant with them. What does this look like in practice? Not as an abstract ideal, but as relational hygiene you can feel in the room. First, there is the creation of a temenos, a protected psychic space in which truth can be spoken without theatrics. The individuating person cultivates such a vessel in themselves. They do not need to be the savior, the victim, or the judge. They can set boundaries without rage, apologize without collapse, and disagree without moral melodrama. This ordinary dignity is the behavioral signature of integration. Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The integrated individual therefore keeps a living contract with their shadow. They ask, what in me is being constellated right now, before deciding what in you must be corrected. Instead of projecting, they practice symbolic containment. They notice the heat of an archetype, the judge, the martyr, the redeemer, and name it inwardly. Naming cools identification. It restores the small but crucial distance in which freedom lives. From that distance, repair becomes possible. They can say, I see, I reacted from an old pattern. Let me try again, and the pattern actually loosens. This is not moral perfection. It is moral metabolism. At this threshold, another Jungian law comes into view, enantiodromia, the turning of things into their opposite. When shadow is denied virtue, curdles into self-righteousness. When shadow is integrated, even fierce truth-telling becomes merciful. The same energy that once fueled projection now powers discernment. You no longer need an enemy to feel alive. You can refuse manipulation without needing to humiliate the manipulator. You can depart a harmful bond without making yourself a saint. Individuation thus reframes strength. It is not domination or submission, but the capacity to remain related to reality inner and outer under tension. Practically, this path asks for small, repeatable rites, daily reflective writing that tracks triggers and motifs, active imagination that lets a charged image speak without being acted out, sober dialogue with a trusted other who can say, that sounds like your old story, deliberate pauses before public pronouncements, and periodic retreats that thin the persona so the self can be heard. Over time, these micro-acts consolidate into character, and character, in Jung's sense, is destiny transformed, no longer the inertia of the past, but a freely chosen shape. When you meet someone living this way, you feel it as calm coherence. Their presence does not demand belief. It invites responsibility. Here, the danger signals recede, not because darkness has been defeated, but because it has been welcomed into rightful place. That is the quiet miracle of individuation. The world becomes less haunted when even one person consents to be whole. As Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki said, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's, there are few. Before closing, have you noticed any of these signals in key people in your life? Or, more importantly, in yourself? If this resonated, share your reflections. Awareness is the first step toward change. Please share this with those who may need to awaken to unconscious relational patterns, and consider activating the bell and subscribing for further explorations of Jung's rich universe. Which signal from this article shows up most clearly in your life right now? Shadow projection inflation, the mask possession, or repetition? Comment 1, if you mainly notice it in others. Comment 2, if you're currently working on integrating it in yourself. If you'd love to keep receiving more meaningful videos about psychology healing and understanding yourself better, consider supporting the channel by becoming a member. Your registration not only unlocks more valuable content for you, but also gives me the motivation to keep creating and sharing regularly.